The melee continues. Hello?
Hello.
You're not Ronnie.
I'm Kat, and I have Ronnie tied up in a closet somewhere.
Oh dear. Who are you and why have you commandeered our podcast?
I'm here to pick a bone with the various breasts of the animated animal kingdom.
A curious thing to kidnap my friend for, but okay, no, let's just drop this route. It's not working. Okay, so Catherine, you and I talked about this after you did your own podcast where you reviewed the movie. What is it? I keep forgetting the pluralities of the different word. It's sheep and wolf, sheeps and wolves, sheep and wolf. What is it again?
I think it's sheep and wolves, but I've gotten that wrong before. It might be wolves and sheep.
Yes, in which you waxed lyrical, is the only way I can put it, about your issues with what you called booby animal movies, specifically in animation and illustration, and how you have some things to share with us about this that I thought this is such a fascinating little segment of this review you did that I thought it deserved its own place in our podcast. And you are actually a professional animator, so I thought you were the best person to have in talk about this.
Yeah, I guess I've witnessed firsthand a lot of the booby animals in the wild. Yeah.
The wild meaning like animation, not as in the actual... not the actual wild where real animals dwell.
No, they don't look like that. Well, some of them do, but that's that's for later.
That's a whole other can of worms.
That's another podcast, I think.
That's, yeah, the one that'll be hopefully reserved until the end of the world.
When we've run out of other things to talk about. Let's talk about which real animals have breasts.
Maybe we should skip that whole discussion because that's a set of thoughts too terrifying to even contemplate. So let's just go straight into talking about what exactly is the subject under discussion, and why do you have, let's say, an issue with it? You see, this topic has come up again lately with the new Space Jam film coming out, and the horror and controversy in the animation community, certain very loud segments of the animation community, about the fact that Lola Bunny no longer has such prominent breasts in her new iteration. Even though this isn't new, because they already reduced the size of her breasts for the 2010s animated series they did of Looney Tunes, so this is not new, but it's, I guess, new to them who only check in on this issue when there's something to rant and rave about. But can you tell us a little bit your thoughts on this whole debacle?
Oh, and the Lola Bunny thing specifically?
Yeah, as a kind of jumping off point for the wider discussion.
This one is interesting because I know that the piece of fan art... Oh, sorry, I've spoiled my anecdote now. The piece of art that was going around that depicted like the the good olden times large-breasted Lola Bunny was a bit of fan art. So like she doesn't have such big boobs in the movie. So it's kind of... And like they're comparing, I guess, an exaggerated piece of fan art to one promotional image from the Space Jam sequel, which, I don't know if it's really representative of what she looks like. So I guess whether or not it's even a thing that's happening is in question for me, much less something to be mad about.
And obviously it's not. It doesn't just apply to anthropomorphic animal characters in animation. It applies to animation in general, and even video games in general. Like, there was a huge stink over the fact that in the Final Fantasy VII remake, Tifa's breasts weren't as noticeable as they were in the original game. I think part of that is due to the original had a more cartoony art style, whereas this has a more slightly grounded art style, but it's going to crop up anytime something like this happens, where it seems that anthropomorphic characters have become slightly less sexual.
Yeah, and people are very mad about it. And that was a big thing with Lara Croft as well, like when Lara Croft kind of got, modernized and she kind of looked like a real person, and people were mad that the triangle breasts were gone, and it's like... Okay, but that didn't look like anything. It's definitely like, I don't know, like for some reason, animated women always have, whether they're human or not, like there's always an insistence on a certain angle of sexualization. And
and that even applies for stuff aimed at children, like even stuff where adults who would be into this kind of thing. And my opinion, if you're into that kind of thing, fine, that's like whatever you're into, whatever makes you happy, as long as you're not hurting anybody else. But even where they're not the primary demographic, they still have something to say about it regarding how sexy these characters are.
Yeah, it's a strange obsession that I find it hard to get into the mind of. Like,
the best explanation I've been able to come up with is these tend to be characters from their childhood that they're used to thinking about a certain way, and when a new version of the property comes out or a new spin is put on it, they don't like what they grew up with being meddled with, because this, for them, I guess, was part of their burgeoning sexuality. It's the first time they started thinking about sex in a certain way. I guess these characters were in the mix, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I suppose it's a very personal attachment to it. I don't know, like I feel like I don't really retroactively apply such personal stuff to cartoons that I've grown up since, like, because you see a lot of them are bad for different reasons other than the characters aren't sexy anymore, so it's hard for me to feel that attached to it.
Yeah, but I guess in these cases, it's not just a case of growing attached to a particular character, it's also being part of the fandom, and in some cases drawing fan art and fan fiction of these characters. So it's not just that they're used to thinking about them a certain way. In a sense, they've also made them a certain way just through fanon. You know, there's canon and then there's fanon.
Absolutely, like that's bringing it back to the Lola Bunny thing, where like people's memories of her were the fan interpretation of it. It was that kind of even more sexualized memory of her that they were mad was being besmirched by something that was slightly less sexualized.
I guess most of us could probably get that, at least on some level. Even if we don't personally feel that way, we could at least insert ourselves into the mindset of that. When it's a character that looks like a human being, or even if it's like Jessica Rabbit, where she has proportions that no actual human being could actually have, and if they did, they'd probably die from like spinal injuries or something. Yeah. But in this particular case, it's a character who is not a human being, is an anthropomorphic animal creature that has human characteristics. So most people, even when they can sympathize with that side of the argument, they can't sympathize when it comes to an animal character who looks like a human.
Yeah, because I think Jessica Rabbit, like, for her, like, her
and for those who don't know, anyone listening to this, Jessica Rabbit, I know the name is confusing. She's not actually a rabbit. She's
she's a human being.
Which is, I know we're probably confusing people. Lola Bunny is an actual rabbit. Jessica Rabbit is not a rabbit. She's a human.
But for her, like, I think, you see, that's an example that I think is an interesting counterpoint to the Lola Bunny example, because, like, Jessica Rabbit, like, she's kind of supposed to be, like, this sultry character, and, like, she is, like, her design is sexualized. It's telling the story, you know? Whereas I think Lola Bunny having boobs or not isn't really contributing in any way, in any meaningful way, to what the narrative of the story is or to what her character is, you know? Like, I feel like a lot of the time it's just like, this is a girl character and therefore, like, she needs to have, like, 'cause a lot of the time, like, animated animals, especially more like non-human looking animals, like Lola Bunny, like, you know, she is approaching a human shape. A lot of the time they'll have like sort of just kind of a sculpted looking torso to kind of remind you of boobs rather than like directly having boobs. And it's not really adding anything, you know? It's kind of less overt sexualization as part of a character and more, this is what a female is. This is what a femoid looks like.
I've heard that story that baby chicks, after they've just been born and when they're looking for food from their mother, if you put just a blank page with, like, I think, is it a red line and like a yellow bit on top, the chicks will go crazy because they can't see very well, but in their minds, like, that set of shapes and arranged in that particular pattern tells them in their minds, that's where the food comes from. And I think human sexuality, you could say, works in a similar way, where if you present a set of shapes to a person, that will conjure up like sexual emotions or sexual impression, even if it's not a human, even if it's not something you could actually have sex with. It's something that conjures up the idea of sex.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I remember, I think it was Katya, the drag queen who was on RuPaul's Drag Race, was on one of her videos before, she said something about, like, if you put a wig on a fire hydrant, men will be attracted to it. And I think, like...
Yeah, if you just draw, like, a stick figure with, where it's arranged in a particular... Even though it's just lines on a page, it will send off a signal in people's heads to think about it in a certain way. And I guess that is the appeal of sexualizing creatures that look like animals. And I've kind of asked around about this in preparation for this podcast, and what a lot of people have said that what appeals to them about sexy-looking anthropomorphic animal characters is it combines two things that are both appealing but for different reasons in one. Like how Alan Moore said that comics are great because you use both sides of your brain, the language part of your brain and the image part of your brain at the same time. And for them, what's appealing to them is it's combining eroticism on one hand and cuteness on the other hand. It's two things that don't normally go together, but they're kind of put together in the form of, like, animals are cute, real human people are hot, but this is like both in one. For them, that's the appeal there, at least according to them.
Yeah, you see, like, I have absolutely no, like, problem with that at all. Like, that as a perfectly valid, like, way of artistically expressing yourself, or like sexually expressing yourself or whatever. That's completely valid. I guess, like, the thing for me, I guess I'm going to bring it back to Sheep and Wolves, because that was like a particularly, like, furry adjacent example where, like, the love interest in that did look like something directly taken from, like, sort of 2008 era furry art. And this way of portraying animal characters is like a shorthand for making them women as opposed to making them sexy, if you get me. So, like, if you look at any of these examples with their male counterparts, it's kind of like the male counterparts have been made to look like what their character is or what their animal is. So they'll look like, they'll look like a wolf that's strong, or they'll look like a wolf that's evil. Whereas the female characters are like, this is a wolf, that's a girl, that way.
It's going back to that whole male gets variety, female just gets to be female.
Exactly, yeah. No, it's like there's a default character, and then female is an additional tag that's put on that you have to work around, rather than, I guess, like, being a character that can be as interesting or even visually interesting as any of the male characters can be. But it's kind of a stifling effect where it's like, we have to make this character look like a girl. How do we do that? We apply all of these shapes and signifiers that we understand to mean female for. Like, it's not necessarily that the end goal is to make them sexy. That's just kind of how we relate to those signifiers.
I think maybe I'm a little bit more cynical about it, because I think not only is it we need to make them sexy to make it clear that they're female, but also it's saying through visual language the only thing that female characters are allowed to be is sexy.
Yeah, I think that's like a perfectly, that's a valid
at least
interpretation.
Sexy in a traditional heteronormative kind of way.
Yeah, and I think that kind of stuff goes back to, like, the older Disney movies and stuff, where like Glenn Keane, for example, talked a lot about, like, how he had to make Pocahontas hot in a certain way and all this kind of thing. And it's like, I don't really know, like, how necessary it is that, like, that has to be your goal with a female character design. Like, and
also in real life, Pocahontas was 12.
That is a enormous element of it. Yeah, I didn't even think of that when I was talking about it in a purely animation sense. But yeah, there was a real person, and she was a child.
Kind of adjacent to this whole thing is the fact that I guess this is going to be a big sidebar. We'll get back to booby animals in a second, but something that just because you're a professional animation person, I occasionally think about asking you this, that it seems that when teenage characters are drawn, like we talked about Pocahontas in real life being 12, but in the movie she looks about like early 20s or something, but when teenage characters are drawn in animation, especially lately, they tend to look much older than they are. They look more like they're in their 20s. This often gets really uncomfortable because you see a lot of the male fandom, especially, sexualizing them in their fan art, and very often these are men in their 20s and 30s, kind of lusting after teenage characters with the excuse being, well, they don't look like teenagers. Because if you actually draw, like, there's a new Disney show called The Owl House, which has 14-year-olds as the protagonists who actually look 14, but they look so different from what we're used to thinking in animation a 14-year-old looking like.
I feel like this is a hangover from live action stuff, really, because if you look at like a lot of live action films and TV shows and stuff, the teenage characters are often played by people in their mid-20s. And like, I feel like it's more of a general visual language problem that we kind of don't like looking at what real teenagers look like. Because like, I remember being a teenager and I remember how, even you look at real teenagers in real life and they look like kids, but like, I think the Hollywood machine wants like people of that age to be a bit sexier, as much as saying it aloud makes it obvious that that's bad. Like, that is still very much a drive, I think, in just TV and film
to such an extent that when you see, mostly when you see a movie about teenagers that's actually starring real people who are the same age as the characters, we tend to kind of double back a little bit, like, wait a minute, shouldn't they look older than that? Are they younger? Like, the script tells me that these characters are 16, but to me they look more like 13, 14, but no, that's what a real 16-year-old looks like.
Yeah, because I think we're so used to that kind of like Sabrina the Teenage Witch type of thing where like she's kind of significantly older than...
90210.
Yeah.
That was the notorious case where they actually, I think they cast a 36-year-old as a 16-year-old.
God, yeah. Yeah, no, that stuff happens like all the time, like, and it continues to happen with like teen media. And like, I guess the marketing, but the marketing point of view on that is that people want to, or like adolescents anyway, they want to watch media about people older than themselves because they want to kind of be able to project onto characters that they feel are more cool or mature than they are. So like, I can see how that gets exaggerated into just like these teenagers, these real teens kind of look too dweeby. We need to get someone a bit cooler to portray them.
Yeah, I think an interesting case to bring up in that is Archie Comics, which it's not animation. I guess it's comics and illustration, but well, it's been adapted to animation, so I guess it still applies. But it famously was a comic series about teenagers that was never actually read by teenagers. It was either read by kids looking forward to being teenagers or adults looking back nostalgically on being teenagers, but actual teenagers could never relate to it, like because they didn't seem real. They seemed either like aspirations or like nostalgic.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a thing.
And so we kind of lose that connection with the real thing, and that bleeds over into animation, and I guess that's connected in that way to anthropomorphic animals, because occasionally I'll see, like, I love animation, and I'm on Facebook because I'm a dinosaur, but on Facebook there's a lot of groups you can join for various fandoms, and people will often post their own fan art, and they will sometimes take they will sometimes take a anthropomorphic animal character who actually looks more like an animal than a human, but redo them to look more human-like and almost inevitably more sexual.
Yeah, like that just seems to be the impulse.
And it's not always, I know we've titled this episode The Politics of Booby Animals, but it isn't just booby animals. It's also sometimes, I guess you could call them hunky animals. It seems the demographic who are into hunky male animated characters are, when they're female, they tend to skew younger, whereas it's the opposite with anthropomorphic female characters who are sexual. The people who tend to be into that, at least from the sample size I've been looking at, tend to be 20s and 30s, whereas with female fans who are into sexualizing male characters, it tends to be teens and 20s, so it's like a decade removed. And I don't know why that is.
I can't think of that. I don't really know. Because I think, oh my God. Sorry, I just remembered when you were talking, as soon as you said hunky animals, I had an immediate image appear in my mind, and I wish I could remember which Madagascar movie it was from. But this is one of the first times like I noticed that there was a deliberately sexualized male character, and it was a hippopotamus. I think it was the second Madagascar movie.
I've only seen the first one, so
Yeah, but I'm just trying to call it to mind. But it was just like, it was the first time like that I had seen and it was kind of played for laughs, like to have this like, obviously like it's kind of a bit of a fat phobic joke as well because he's like a hippopotamus and somebody thinks he's sexy. But like you see that a lot in kids movies, anyways, where the kind of male gaze thing where they're looking at like a sexy girl animal appear, and but.
I think it says something that was the very first time you realized it being done to a male character, because it's so often the opposite, where I think you put it brilliantly when you said that male anthropomorphic animal characters are allowed to be scary or funny or heroic, but female animated characters are just allowed to be female and usually sexy.
Yeah.
Unless they're making a fat phobic joke.
Yeah, often. A lot of the Don Bluth movies as well are like, obviously like those are great movies. I'm not going to like say anything particularly besmirching of his legacy or whatever. A lot of those movies do have like that weird thing of it's a sexy chicken that's just a lady with a beak on kind of thing.
I wonder if he's an old man now, but if he were younger, would he be on all of those forums complaining about the desexualization of Lola Bunny?
Hopefully not.
Because when I look back at past generations, I like to think they were probably more like us than different from us, but because very often when you take someone who we associate with the past but stick them in the modern day, because they're still here, like William Shatner sounds exactly the same as like your average 20 or 30 year old complaining about like cancel culture and the like, so we're not that different. So I wonder, would he be one of those people complaining about there aren't enough sexy cartoons anymore?
Let's hope not.
Let's keep our memories pure.
Exactly, yeah. As pure as they can be.
As pure as they can possibly... Oh no, like I just realized, are we doing the same thing that we're criticizing? Are we trying to keep our memories, our positive memories of the past a certain way and looking down on attempts to meddle with them?
Oh God, no!
We've become everything we hated.
John Bluth be an internet weirdo all he likes, it's fine!
To play devil's advocate, some of the people I asked said that for them, characters like this, human and anthropomorphic animal... I really need to come up with a shorter way of saying that. It sounds so technical. But they said that, well, young people develop sexually at a young age from things that they're into just casually. Like and this for them was part of their... It was like training wheels for becoming fully sexual human beings. So they don't like when it's desexualized, because to them that's taking away part of their early development, in a sense.
Yeah, like I wouldn't be at all an advocate for like scrubbing anything of, from children's media of sexuality. Like that's not something that I think is a good direction to go in. I guess like my feelings about the booby animal thing is more from kind of a gender studies kind of perspective, where I'm like, it's strange that it's othering of the female characters.
Yeah,
I don't want to see a world with no sexual animals in it. They're a thing that people want, and I want them to survive,
So I guess the final question would be, is the solution equal opportunity sexy animals?
We need to have equal balance of the sexy animals. We need male sexy animals, female sexy animals, and everything in between sexy animals.
And of course, more just as male characters can be heroic, scary, funny, I guess we can. That also means having sexy comedic, sexy scary, sexy heroic, not just on the male side, but on the female side too. So balance the scale somewhat.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like a huge part of this is just kind of like people are stuck in visual stereotypes of what certain things should look like, and a lot of the time that's kind of compounded by the fact that there aren't a lot of female characters in animated stuff. Because I was even kind of looking around at some of the examples that I remembered like before we had this call, like to kind of boost my memory. And I was like, okay, well, she's in it, but she's only in it for like a scene. Like, does that really count? And I was like, I can't think of any other female characters in this movie. You know, like, and I think if there was kind of, you see, most of the time, I say people, I mostly mean like executives and things, introduced female characters into stuff less as a strange alien presence that they have to include, you know, and more. I think like I'm encouraged by kind of, you know, people kind of have more creative control over things than they used to. Like, I think, is that true? That's not true. Strike that from the record.
I guess you could say, at least in the fan art and fan fiction sphere, it is a lot more equal opportunity. There are more diverse kinds of interpretations as to what quote-unquote sexy can look like, you know, whether it comes to different body types or different sexualities, or at the very least the demand for it is there. It just depends on whether or not those actually in charge of the means of producing these television animation, film animation, comics. Well, comics is a bit different. I guess in animation it's a lot more expensive and a lot more capital intensive, but whether they will see that there is a demand there for a different kind of sexy animal and meet the demand, so to speak, that already exists there in the fanosphere.
Yeah, because like even in the kind of characters that people sexualize, very often they're like not characters that are meant to be sexualized. Like particularly in like male characters that people kind of obsess about. Like I remember I followed a guy on Tumblr before who was absolutely obsessed with Moriarty from the Sherlock Hound series. He is like not what you would call traditionally sexy, is all I'll say. But like, I was just like, people will find like that part of things where they're going to find it, you know, like if they insist on kind of having that stuff there, like people will find it for themselves.
Oh
like,
yeah, and of course there's an absolute deluge of female fans who grew up obsessed with the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, who is not at all conventionally attractive, but there's something in there that strikes a chord and that gets the fan art juices flowing.
Yeah, so I think like if there's an insistence that there needs to be something sexy there, so everything is sexy to somebody. You know? If that's what we have to do.
Yeah, we've just been led to believe that only a certain kind of thing can be sexy for female characters, and that they can only be this. Not only can they only be one kind of sexy, they can only be that kind of sexy and little else.
Like from a character design perspective, it's almost less about like this needs to be sexy and more like this needs to be womanly, you know, like this needs to have the signifiers of womanhood.
Because for a straight guy, the shorthand, the mental shorthand for woman is sexy.
Yeah, it's boobs and it's big eyelashes and it's wide hips and all this kind of thing. Like, yeah.
So I guess the lesson of the story is that we need fewer straight guys in charge of animation, and we need to because or at the very least, where we do, they need to take a gender studies course and a course in human sexuality and learn from different people that sexy isn't shorthand for female.
Yeah, and like female characters are just characters, you know, like if it's a girl fox, it doesn't really need to have boobs unless like that is what you really want.
Unless like her character has something to do with like being a seductress or something.
Yeah, like go on, like then you know, eat your heart out, whatever.
Yeah, sexy isn't necessarily bad. Sexy can be good when in service of the story.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of the time like it is a problem that like there is only like two female characters and one of them is the sexy one and one of them is the mom one. Like that's a huge thing where it's like that's kind of one of the limited roles that female characters can be put in.
Madonna whore complex.
Exactly, yeah, no, it's that thing. Like that animation is full of that, but like it doesn't
because
have
society
to be that
is full
way,
of that.
Yeah, exactly. Like it just kind of I feel like with animation, because you make every choice along the way, there's a lot of space to make bad choices.
Yeah. And at the very least, I haven't really seen it that much with anthropomorphic animal characters, but at the very least, in depicting humans, it's changing in terms of ideas of what can be sexy. Like the biggest example you and I would have as a reference point is the new She-Ra, where there's a very wide diversity of body types for both male and female characters. And obviously, you know, fans are sex crazy. So if they see a character they like, they're going to draw erotic fan work of the character. But at the very least, it's a wider conception of what can be sexy if you're going to interpret it that way. So I guess put more people like Noelle Stevenson in charge of creating sexy animals.
Yeah, like that's the thing. Like you just need, if you want more of a diversity of characters, like just what certain characters are allowed to be, like you need to have, you know, people, different kinds of people allowed to make those choices. Like I guess like a lot of big budget animation kind of is in that kind of, it's kind of stuck in the past in a way because there is so much money involved, you know, like as you said, it's a lot of capital swirling around in there, and like executives are very reticent to kind of change the way that things have been done. You know, they'll have all these rules that things need to be a certain way, and they kind of don't want to push the boat too much or rock the boat even.
I guess the solution animation could be try to convince these people, as Guillermo del Toro calls them, the bastards with the money, that there is a big fan base out there for changing things to have a perception of what's sexy, because if you do that, you will reach, in fact, a wider number of people who will be into your thing, will be doing more fan art about your thing, and will help it grow. You'll actually get more money from doing it our way.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like,
we're stuck in a horrible economic system for the time being, so if we're stuck in it, at the very least, while we're trying to change it, we could at the very least try to use it against itself.
Yeah, while we're in the game, we might as well speak their language. Like, because even when She-Ra was first being like advertised, like this is coming back to boobs a little bit, but like they had that whole thing where like weird internet guys were getting very upset about the fact that She-Ra looked kind of flat chested, and like that was a
She-Ra,
huge, like,
more like He-Ra.
Oh my god, it was so horrible. But like that ended up being like really successful and really, really popular because people were gagging for like something different and something.
Oh yeah, you know, and the fan base is still huge. I mean, there are people who will, with no falsity whatsoever, say this changed my life for the better.
Yeah, because it was such a breath of fresh air. You know, like it was just like these people look different, and it wasn't like completely devoid of like characters that you could personally be attracted to or sexualize if that's like the angle that you're going at it with. It was just different, you know, and I think that like feature animation is behind in that way, where it is kind of struggling to get to the point where like where She-Ra is, you know.
Yeah, so I guess She-Ra has been the vanguard in that. So I guess animation executives, if you're listening, you're not, but hypothetical animation executives, if you're listening, more stuff like She-Ra, but with animals in it.
Yeah, make She-Ra but furry.
She-Ra but furry. Like, furify
so
She-Ra. You know what? There probably already is a furry version of...
Oh, well, Catra is already
And I
furry.
bet Catra... That's the thing. I bet Catra isn't actually a cat. just for the sake of irony.
Yeah, oh my god. And they have a lizard man in that as well. Okay, yeah, we better wrap this up before it gets too far.
Okay, yeah, we went way over time. Yeah, this is... Okay, so if you wouldn't mind, Catherine, can you untie Ronnie now?
Okay, fine.
All right. Next week, back to our regularly scheduled bitching about this or that. But would you actually mind popping by once in a while to vent about something that's bothering you in animation, given that that's your specialty?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, anytime that Roddy needs to be caught in a net and put somewhere
and he does
away
sometimes, let's be fair, like, can't let him get too ahead of himself.
When he steps out of line, yeah.
When he steps out of line, yeah, that motherfucker.